Join the Army. You could travel to amazing places, get good job skills, earn a bunch of money, or you might end up dead, disabled, divorced, and hating life. That's part of the gamble. So today I'll talk about if you should join the Army.
You're reaching deep inside you, for things you've never known. It's been tough, rough going, but you haven't gone alone.
We do more before 9 a.m. than most people do all day.
Be all that you can
Hey,
be.
First Sergeant. Good morning.
You can do it in the Army.
So this year, it's been 20 years since I actually got out of the Army. I was in 4 years in the 82nd Airborne Division in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And so even though it's been 20 years, you know, not much has changed. I just did a bunch of research and watched some YouTube videos of people that are in, and almost everything's about the same. And I even remember when I was in, all the older guys I saw who were like in 20 years before me or whatever, you know, the Army's been the same since the beginning of time pretty much. So I'll kind of go through my experiences of going through, you know, taking the ASVAP into, you know, going into basic training, AIT Airborne School, and my experience at Fort Bragg. And then I'll mention, like, you know, some of my recommendations for like either jobs. Should you do like Special Forces or Airborne School? Should you be enlisted or an officer? And then I'll tell you some of the pros and cons of the military and some of the pitfalls of being in the military, because there's a lot of ways you could really fuck up and that could leave you worse off than when you even entered. And I'll go over a little bit about like what you'll earn and some of the bonuses and things like that as far as like education benefits and stuff like this. So my experience is mostly based as an enlisted guy. I was an E1 when I went in, and then I left as a corporal, which is an E4. So some of you have probably already talked to a recruiter or are interested. And one big thing you have to realize is that a lot of you aren't even eligible to get into the military. It's not as easy as you'd think. You know, I know back in the day in like Vietnam, they were just like getting any people they could to join, or during wartime in some situations. And they are desperate these days, and they do have some good bonuses, but I think about 70 or 75% of the people can't even get into the military because they're either overweight, you know, drug use or criminal problems, or they didn't finish high school, this kind of stuff. So a lot of people aren't going to get in for those reasons. And then the other issue is that they can't even pass the ASVAB. I think 30% can't even finish that. You know, so like for instance, a lot of people, you know, like smoke pot, whatever, you know, it might be fine in your state where you're from, you might be able to buy it legally, but the Army still has a policy where if you piss hot, you know, you can't get in. You know, if you do get denied because of that, you can reapply 90 days later, but if you piss hot a second time, you're out. So if you're thinking about going in, you definitely have to be drug-free. I know we had regular drug tests every like couple months or something like that. So if you have any issues with drugs, you're definitely gonna have to kick that before you get in. So in my case, you know, I went in, I talked to a recruiter, and I took the ASVAB test, which is the main test you take to get into the military. And that'll tell you like what jobs you're eligible to get. And so I scored really well on the ASVAB test, and I was able to get like almost any job in the military. So I was super excited. But once they tested my eye, I've got something called like amblyopia or something like that. It's kind of like lazy eye. And so I'm almost blind in that eye, and I almost didn't get in. And so I got a waiver, but then I lost all of the good job opportunities I could have had. So I was like, damn it. So I still maybe could have done some combat arms, but I was kind of limited to like an administration specialist. I couldn't have done any of the cool things like an imagery analysis for like maps and stuff like that, and some other cool jobs, but I couldn't do any of those. So should you go combat arms or not? You know, this is a good question. You know, the combat arms role in a way is more prestigious as far as like, you know, guys want to be in infantry or in a tank or artillery and this kind of thing. But those schedules are like, they're not really 8 to 5. You have training exercise for, you know, a few days or a couple weeks somewhere. And so like I was like an admin job, I was more of soft skills. I could go to college at night for the most part, you know, so I get off work, you know, it'd be like 9 to 5, and then I go to class from like 6 to 10 or like, you know, 7 to 9:30 or whatever the course was. So doing some of those soft skill jobs are probably better if you want to take the opportunity to take college at night, or if you want those skills to be transferable to a civilian job when you get out. Because a lot of these jobs like infantry and artillery and stuff like that aren't necessarily going to be the best thing to get you a job. You know, I mean, of course, if it's security or law enforcement and things like that, for sure, and some other things. but you might want to get something that could help you on the way out, because as much as you think you might stay in forever, like you might not, as most people don't. And then also you got to remember, although you do some cool exercises in combat arms and you're out doing some interesting training or whatever, like, who do you think cuts the grass and does painting on base? Do you think they hire a bunch of migrant workers to do those jobs? Like, so you're, a lot of the time you're going to be like cleaning out and doing maintenance on your rifles or artillery or these different things, or your vehicles and stuff like that. So that's a lot of the maintenance, but you're going to be doing maintenance on base a lot too. So it's not all glory. Maybe if you want to be in a combat role and there's a war and you're doing that actively, that might be something people enjoy. But when you're not in the conflict, you're just practicing for a conflict, and a lot of maintenance and other sitting around, kind of hurry up and wait stuff. So I'm not saying don't do combat arms. I'm just saying, like, consider your long-term goals there. And then also, if you're like, soft skills, like something where males and females can both do that job, then you're going to work around some women some of the time, right? Which, personally, I like more of a little bit more diverse in that regard. Just only being around guys all the time, to me, gets a little old after a bit. Like, it's definitely fun, but so I think maybe a little diversity in the workplace can make your job a little better in the long term, too. As far as some of the other special schools you could take, like, Airborne School, Air Assault, Ranger Training, Special Forces, and that kind of stuff. I mean, that's up to you. One big thing to understand is, like, for instance, I went airborne, okay? So it's only 3 weeks, and if you're in that unit, you get another $150 a month, right? But the problem with that is that you're most likely to be stuck at, like, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Not only for the, like, 3.5 years I was in, but most of your career. So you might do, like a few years abroad, but you'll usually come back to the 82nd or to Fort Bragg in general. I wanted to travel when I went in the military. And so it's like, when I found out that I was going from South Carolina to Georgia for training to North Carolina, it was like, oh, that sucks, So some of the designations you get might stick you in a certain area or a base that's not super desirable, in my opinion. So I won't go into all the details of the other schools and things. Like, personally, I think maybe, like, for me, it seems like Special Forces was more interesting. The Rangers thing is, they're all tough, so it depends. That's definitely a career path that's quite different. You'll have to research that more and see if that's something you want to do. And as far as the traveling thing, I did see now you can choose where you want to be stationed, but it's at certain domestic locations in the States. So you could choose like a certain job and a duty station in America, for instance, but it depends on your job in the duty station. So like if you really want to go to like Germany or, Italy or something like that, or Korea, they can't guarantee you overseas, but they can guarantee you a few of the spots in the United States. So not only your unit, but also your type of job, because some of the jobs you take might be only in certain duty stations. So make sure your job is not tied, or your special designation is not tied to a certain area. I won't go all the way into if you should be an officer or not. For me personally, if I stayed in, I would become an officer because you get paid like twice as much and you have much more respect and that kind of thing. But being an NCO can also be a good thing too. It just depends the different role you want to take for the long term. So, you went through your physical and your ASVAP and all that stuff. You get to basic training, and actually you don't start your basic training right away. You're actually in reception. So reception's about, maybe 2 weeks, and that's where you get your haircut, you get your shots, your uniform and equipment and stuff like that, and you wait to get processed to start basic training. So those 2 weeks, like most of the basic trainings, hurry up and wait. They make you rush to get all these things done, and then like for maybe all day or several days, you're sitting around waiting to do the next thing. So most of that time, you're just sitting around, basically. And, whenever anyone of any rank, like corporal or above, walks outside, it's like, at ease, you got to stand up and put your hands behind your back. And, of course, some people aren't paying attention. They're slow. And so they're like, get down and do push-ups. You're supposed to, move faster. So really, most of the time, you're just doing push-ups and sit-ups and getting smoked, especially the first 2 or 3 weeks there. And I won't go into all the details about basic training. I mean, honestly, I didn't think it was that hard. As I mentioned, my job was an administration specialist, a 71 Lima. So there were females mixed in with us. And I really didn't think overall it was that hard, any part of it. You start off mostly learning marching, and then you do stuff like navigation, and you go through like the tear gas chamber, and then you have like the marksmanship stuff the last couple weeks or whatever, and then you have like a long march. Generally speaking, it wasn't real hard. I mean, the difficult thing is like dealing with all the people around you. Like most people are super stressed out. I personally like wasn't worried. Like if someone wasn't paying attention for a second, we had to do, 30 push-ups or get smoked. It wasn't like I was so afraid of that. Whereas a lot of the people around you, it's not just the drill sergeants and stuff are telling you, to do this or that. The people around you are stressed out. So they're actually the ones policing you too. I found that was a little annoying at times, of course. The other really difficult thing is that you're tired all the time. I don't remember, we get up probably like 5 or 5:30 and you'll run or do push-ups and stuff in the morning for an hour, hour and a half. And then you're like kind of in class all day. And then some evenings you'll have fire guard duty. So maybe from like 1 to 2:30 or 3, I forget how long it was. You'll get woken up to walk around and make sure everyone's like, staying in their bed. Like no one's off trying to like, sleep with the other service member or whatever, or doing something wrong. So yeah, you're just tired all the time. And that's kind of difficult because it's hard to stay awake during all these classes. People are always like nodding off and falling asleep. So I would say physically not super hard, mentally probably more challenging. If you do have hard times or you get in trouble during basic, they can recycle you to the beginning. So maybe you're in your, let's say basic training's 10 weeks. You can get through the whole 10 weeks or even 8 weeks. And if you don't pass a certain area, they'll recycle you. So you can go all the way back to the beginning, or you might go back to like week 6 to redo a certain area. So that was the big thing we were afraid of too. It was like, man, I don't want to do this all over again. But overall, basic training like wasn't super hard or anything like that. And then when you finish, usually your parents come, you have a graduation, and you get a couple days off or a few days off. And then you'll go on to AIT, Advanced Individual Training, which is different for everyone. So all of those people, for the most part, are going to go to either back home or go back to different bases around the USA for their training. Mine was only 5 weeks, and it was pretty easy. It was like how to turn on a computer. It was like really, really basic stuff, Microsoft Word, and none of the things I would actually later end up using. The other big surprise I got when we got to AIT is that when we showed up, we had to, we were told grab our stuff and go into the barracks or whatever, and we went too slow, and the guy yelled at us and smoked us. We had to do it again. And there's drill sergeants in AIT too. So I thought when we finished basic that like that was over. And no, it's all drill sergeants for AIT too. So it's a little more relaxed, and you can get off on the weekends and stuff occasionally. But it's definitely still, kind of stressful as far as the drill sergeants being around and stuff. And that's actually the first time you could actually get in trouble because, of course, a lot of us are underage. We want to go off drinking and stuff like that. And that's the way you could definitely get in trouble. Luckily, I never had any issues, but some guys, obviously get in trouble with that kind of stuff. I remember even one trip we did, this is so bizarre, like we're in Fort Jackson, and, downtown's 5 Points and stuff, and, we can't go out to a bar because a lot of people are underage, so we actually went off to the zoo for the day. And so, like, we ended up bringing vodka and stuff, or, like, downing vodka and stuff, like, in the bathrooms and walking around at the zoo. And a few of us could handle it, but a couple of the guys, I remember one guy in particular was, like, walking through the zoo like a zombie barfing. It's like, how bizarre this must be for, like, the other, like, people at the zoo wandering around. Like, why are these people trashed at the zoo at, like, 1 PM vomiting? So luckily we didn't get in trouble or anything, but those are definitely the first weekends you get out. People obviously want to blow off a lot of steam. Of course, drinking and driving is a big issue. If you get in trouble with that, you could get kicked out. I know that obviously that was a big thing over the years. I know in Fort Bragg, like they even had a sign, because we were the 82nd Airborne Division, and they had a sign if you could go like 82 days without someone dying for any reason. It could have been like combat training or whatever, or drinking, driving. We get like a 3-day weekend or something like that. And we did make 82 days a lot, and maybe even up to like a couple hundred days sometimes, or maybe even higher. But a lot of times, we didn't make it for those reasons. Maybe someone died parachuting or whatever. So, you got to be careful there on the weekends. It could be a way to get in trouble for sure. Kind of another funny thing too about basic training or AIT or the military in general, they don't swear. I was really surprised because, when I got to basic, they're like doggone it and damn and like all this stuff. And I was like, wow, like we might have to kill people, but we're not allowed to swear. So it's like that kind of political correct stuff, I guess has been there a long time, So it's not like Full Metal Jacket or anything like that. I mean, it's definitely toned down quite a bit. And that was over 20 years ago. So I know now a lot of this PC stuff's in the military because it is a government agency. So it's going to have all of that kind of PC stuff, which I personally don't like. So, after AIT, you're going to go to your duty station. For me, I had Airborne School, so that was another 3 weeks, which wasn't like super bad. It's not like the safest way to, jump out of planes probably with a bunch of people this kind of way, but, it's a combat mission, so you're going to drop it maybe 900 feet to 1,200 feet, and, within 30 seconds you hit the ground, because of course people could be shooting at you. So it's not like if you do that with a civilian and you jump out of a plane and you're free falling for a minute and it's safer and stuff like that. So it definitely wasn't as fun as doing it like free falling on my own before I was in the military. So yeah, I went to my unit and I was at headquarters of the 82nd Airborne Division. And I remember I was hoping like I would kind of get a guy who I'd have something in common with, like a sergeant who was kind of like, a similar background to mine. And it was like I got picked up by a black girl from Jersey who, I could tell we probably weren't going to be best friends. She had quite an attitude and stuff. But actually, we did end up becoming friends, and she was cool, actually. But that's a big thing, you might not really get along with the people you work with, or you could have a really cool boss or a shitty boss. And that, of course, will have a big influence on your job. She wasn't going to really teach me how to do that job at all, So I had to figure out quite a lot and take a lot of notes, because she obviously didn't want to repeat herself 100 times. So what I ended up doing was anyone who got kicked out of the military, I did the separation orders. So some of these people were overweight, or they like pissed in their captain's canteen, or they were late for duty, like any people who got in trouble, or maybe mentally they weren't fit. At that time, if you said you were gay, you could get kicked out, because it was a don't ask, don't tell policy at that time. So there's a lot of people getting kicked out for different things. Yeah, DWI, drugs, and all that kind of stuff. I also did line of duty investigations. So this is anyone who basically was hurt or killed in an accident or something like that. We did these line of duty investigations. And then I also did congressional responses. So this was basically anyone who complained to like their congressman, senator, or even the president. Like they could say like, oh, I saw on TV these guys had huge backpacks, they're moving too slow. Or a lot of guys complained that they were being abused in their units. Like I was beat up, or my captain or my sergeant did this to me. So there were all these kinds of complaints that people would write to their congressman and this kind of stuff. So we'd have to reply like, we investigated blah, 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 and we'd return that to the unit and stuff like that. So overall, it's a pretty good job. It was pretty much 8 to 5. And, I was able to take college classes at night. So I almost finished my 2-year associate's degree by the time I got out. So that was good. But I was tired as hell, because I was getting up at 5:45. You usually do, PT, physical training from 6:30, 7:30. That could be like 4-mile run, or push-ups and sit-ups and like other kinds of things. In some units, like every Monday or once a month, they'll do like a 10-mile run. So it depends on your unit. Some of the combat units are obviously going to do a lot more than some of the soft skill kind of units. The good thing is, you do get quite a bit of free time. That's one of the pros in the military. You get a month leave every year, so a month vacation every year that's paid. And we did have a lot of these 3- and 4-day weekends. Like almost every month we had like a 3- or 4-day weekend. So like for me, my life in the Army generally was like we would go off from like Fayetteville, Fort Bragg area, over to like Wilmington, Chapel Hill, Raleigh, over to Charlotte, up to the mountains, Myrtle Beach, anywhere 2-3 hours away, like just to get off base and also be around, because, of course the base is much more guys. It's probably like 90% to 10% women. So your options are limited. And so like we'd want to go off and get like, a little bit more 50-50 ratio. So it was definitely nice to get off base for that aspect. So if you're not married, you're going to live in the barracks pretty much. The barracks could be very different depending on the unit or the duty station or whatever. I was just watching a girl's YouTube video. She definitely had a crappy one like the one I had back in the day, which is just a basic room, like maybe from the 1950s or something like that. I know my like shower heads were broken. It was just water pouring out, and the bathroom stunk. So the barracks were definitely not appealing to be in, at least the unit I was in. Some of the other units had really nice spots. So, that's kind of just luck there too. I know my first roommate, he chain smoked all the time. Half the room was like fast food garbage bags and stuff like that. He was a complete pig. And, chain smoking. And he had a hard time getting up in the morning. So like it's normal for people to hit snooze once or twice, but like he would have snooze start at like 4:30 or 5. And so he'd hit that like every 10 minutes until like, 10 minutes before we had to be at formation in the morning. So I ended up going into a different room, and within a week I had another roommate, and because you usually will have a roommate. And he was a nice enough guy, but like, you know, he never laughed, and I was like, I wanted some privacy. And the other bad thing about the barracks is you get a lot of hey you details. And hey you is like, basically a sergeant or someone has to do something and they need people to do it. So like a common thing is like, of course you have to like clean the bathrooms every week or whatever, twice a week. And so, you know, they would just see people in the bar, hey, cleanup time, bathroom time, whatever. And so whoever was around, they would get to do that, which isn't a real big deal. But like maybe sometimes they're like, oh, hey you, we're gonna paint all day long. So maybe it's a Saturday, it's your day off, and suddenly you're painting all day. Now, of course, some guys just hide in their rooms and they're gonna act like they don't hear anything, right? And you technically could do that, but yeah, you might be thinking you're gonna go out or go do something and people are like, hey you. So that kind of sucks. You never feel like you're really off work. I know we had this crazy first sergeant who came in on the weekends even, and he's like, oh, why didn't you shave? And he was like checking our hair and our boot, like all this kind of stuff when we're off. I was like, man, this guy must have a pretty shitty home life, or like he really wants to get away from his wife, because I don't know why you go to the barracks on the weekend, but so you can deal with that shit. So he actually encouraged people to move off base, and I did. And so me and one of my best friends moved off to it was kind of a cheap apartment, but then it's kind of shitty. Like we even got broken into once. Someone went into the side door, like a storage place right before your main door, and they closed it and they kicked through that wall and fucking broke a bunch of my shit and stuff. It was obviously kids, but yeah, if you you know, you're trying to go budget and you live in an area that's like not super safe, like you could have some other issues. But despite that, we still were happy to live off post, because it you know, you get those 3 or 4 day weekends, and I mean, of course I would usually leave for the weekend anyway, but it was good to have that kind of separation. But that's also going to be a few $100 more, or now I guess it would be much more expensive, obviously. But that depends where you live. So I'll go into some of the pitfalls of being in the military, because there's definitely some things here I think like, you know, could potentially ruin your life, I would say. I mean, that sounds a little harsh, but definitely some things that can mess things up, or at least some things to be aware of. So, of course, when you go through basic and AIT, you're saving quite a bit of that money because you can't even spend it, right? So you're going to have a few $1,000s from that. And then I'm not sure about these bonuses. They say like $50,000 bonus. I don't know exactly the details of that. I think some of that's obviously the education benefits. But I think maybe with some of these things, you get about $10,000 there too. So guys go crazy, man, spend all their money on dumb shit. I mean, it's one thing to like buy a car, but a lot of guys are just going to the strip club, or they meet a girl and they end up buying her like all this shit. I know that guy I mentioned I lived with, who was kind of a pig. His dad had just died that year, and so he got, you know, his inheritance, and he had a boatload of money. And I mean, he just burned through all that money. He changed cars, you know, he bought this car, then he changed his mind, and you know, he liked one of the girls I worked with. And so, you know, he kind of like let her use his credit card for like a weekend, and she just went to like Charlotte Mall and just fucking bought a bunch of shit. And then he reneged on it because, you know, he changed his mind. And then I remember they were even asking me about that. You know, he even went on the, you know, like the sex hotlines and shit, and he was like calling all that shit. And so he racked up like a few $100s, or maybe even a couple $1,000, and that actually was under my name because we shared the room, but the phone number for that room was under mine. So then I had to go through and get the money from him forever. So a lot of guys make huge mistakes. So that's one issue. Now the second big problem is the girls' issues. So for guys, like, your dick is pretty much in control of you for like most of your life. Your brain only starts to get in charge of your body like when you're like 35 or 40. But up until that time, like, girls are like on the priority list for sure in life. So a lot of guys, this is a big issue because, for instance, we kind of had a joke, and it was like, you know, in the Army, they say, "Hua." It's kind of like a good thing, like, "Hua," like awesome. In the Marines, they say, "Hoorah." So I would say to my buddy, like, "Oh, I had a really interesting hua today," meaning a person, like and not an awesome person, but a fucking idiot. And they would be like, "Hua got married," or like Smith did a really hua thing. And I was like, "Oh yeah, he got married?" And it was like 3 questions. It's like, now granted, like this kid, let's say he's like 19, 20 years old, right? And the first thing, it's like, "So how much does she weigh? 150? It's like, "Nope." 200? Nope. 250. It's like, nope. It's like 300, you know? So like these guys are so really overweight. And then the second thing I'd ask, I'd be like, 18? It's It's like, nope. 20? Nope. 25? It's like, she can't be 30. It's like, yep, 33. And it's like, how many kids? No kids? Nope. 1 kid? Nope. 2? Nope. 3. So, I mean, these dudes are like 20 years old at the prime of their life, and they're like married a chick who's like overweight with 2 or 3 kids who's like 10 years older than them or something. You know, and it's just like in the heat of the moment, like, you know, they fall in love with one of the first people they meet, and it's definitely not their best option, you know? And so even if they get divorced or whatever, like, I mean, that's still a huge deal financially. So that's something you really got to be careful of. And another reason why guys do it isn't just because, you know, it's like the first girl they fell in love with or because their hormones are out of control. As I mentioned, living in the barracks sucks ass. So if you get married, you could live in housing, you know, whether on base or off base. So if you're on base, they'll pay for that. Or if you're off base, they'll give you, you know, whatever it would cost. Like, I guess back then it would maybe be $500. Probably today it's like $1,200 or whatever. And then each additional kid, you'll get extra money for that. And you'll get extra money for food. So you don't have to live in the barracks or go to the canteen. You know, it's much nicer to live in a house. Of course it is. And so that's another big incentive. So in that first enlistment, there were guys who fucking hated the military more than anything else in the world, but they got married and they're going to lose those benefits. They're not going to get a month vacation every year. The job's not going to pay for their housing and their food and more money, you know, for every kid they have. And so that really trapped, I think, most of the people in there. Now, sure, is it a good job for a lot of people? Absolutely. You know, I'm not saying it's all bad by any means. I was just saying, you know, don't put yourself in a situation where you've like kind of trapped yourself or cornered yourself into a situation like this. You know, guys obviously blow a bunch of money too at all those strip bars near the base. You know, near the base, you just go down Riley Road and I think Yadkin, so we call it like Riley Raceway and Yadkin Expressway or something. But like, because everyone just races off base to get home. But yeah, that whole strip of shops there is just fast food, strip bars, and hair cutting places. You know, places where you get your hair cut and your uniforms pressed and your boots shined. And so yeah, guys, you know, I mean, they just go to these strip clubs, they meet girls there, and they blow all this friggin' money, and it's like, dude, like, that's just so dumb, you know? Like, that's why I always just drove like 2 hours away on the weekends, try to meet people that were, you know, not related to Fort Bragg or that industry. Like, that, to me, seems like such a waste. And of course, there were clubs in town, but why would I want to go to a club where, like, you know, there's still a majority of guys. It's like 80% Army guys and like 20% of girls who are either divorced or looking for Army dudes or prostitutes. Like, it's not to say all those girls are bad, but like, you know, I would definitely go like a couple hours away for a better pick of the litter. And of course, if you're leaving every weekend, you know, like I said, be careful with the drinking and driving and stuff. I was lucky. One of my best friends, who's actually born in Mexico, he never drank. Like, his dad was a big drinker, but he never got into it. And so he ended up driving me like all the time. So I was really lucky. I had a DD for like, you know, 4 years. There are definitely some days I woke up in my car, you know, that's going to happen from time to time. But yeah, make sure that you can be careful with the kind of stuff drinking and driving, because that can end your career or life real quick. So, you know, the pros of the Army, right? I mean, it'll give you some money for school, give you some discipline if you're lacking that in your life, in direction. You get some good job skills. You've got good vacation time. You'll get that extra money for housing if you're married, etc. Pretty good paying, especially if you're an officer. You could retire after 20 years. So if you're making like, you know, I think like maybe a sergeant, like an E7 would make maybe $4,000 a month when they retire. So you'll get half. So you get $2,000 a month. If you're an officer, you're probably making like, you know, $6,000, $7,000 a month. So you'll get like $3,500 a month if you do 20 years. So it definitely could be worth it, you know, for a lot of ways. It's tough for people to do the 20 years, obviously. Now, another reason why people stay in and re-enlist is also because at the end of your 3 or 4 years is when you usually can get like corporal or like a sergeant. And then you're in charge, and then things get better. Of course, the beginning of the Army, when you're a private or a specialist, it sucks more. But once you get rank, it does get better. So that's one of the reasons why, in that regard, it could get easier, because as you get, you know, higher ranking, you're not obviously on the lowest end of the totem pole, and then you're getting more pay and stuff like that. You know, the GI Bill could be great. You're going to get paid for school, basically. The rules have changed. When I was in, they basically were just giving you $1,500 a month while you're in school. So that doesn't include like January when you're not in school or in the summer. And you could pay for whatever. So if school was, you know, let's say $2,000, you could pay for school, then that extra money would just be yours. Now they pay the school directly, which is kind of good or bad. So now, like, if you do go to a private school that's real expensive, they will pay for that, but you don't pocket all that money. But they do give you like something like maybe $1,200 or something like that for housing. And so you'll still have some like pocket money basically, but you want to look into the details for that. It's going to be longer, like the longer you enlist. So if you're a 2-year enlistment, of course your benefits are going to be less than, you know, if you're a 4-year enlistment or a 6-year enlistment, which by the way, they usually do have 2, 4, and like 6-year enlistments. You know, I would say do shorter. You can always re-enlist, you know, because I remember, you know, I signed up for 4 years and I was like so envious of the guys that only had like a 2 or a 3-year enlistment. So, you know, a lot of guys just don't like it. You know, a lot of people don't like it and they want to get out. So I would do the shorter enlistment, even though it's less money, and then you could always re-enlist if you really like it. Whereas the other way around, you're stuck with it for a while. You know, some of the skills you get are going to definitely be really helpful, even better than a 4-year degree in many cases. I know I have some friends that, you know, had good jobs when they get out and they didn't have to even go to university. So the Army could definitely be good for that aspect too. So if you got a good duty station, a good job, and you know you're in a relatively safe position, it's not bad, which goes into my next point. So now I'll go into some of the cons of the Army. Obviously I mentioned a bunch of things. One other really big thing to me that was a huge minus was that it's not really that much of a merit system as far as promotion goes. Like, you know, everyone goes in pretty much as an E1, or like if you were like an Eagle Scout or you recruited one person, I think you're an E2 or an E3. If you had like a 4-year degree, you'd be a specialist, like an E4. So there's some small differences when you're in, but overall, when you want to get to like Sergeant E5, it's based on a point system. It might be a little different in combat arms, but like for my job, there was like a lot of admin specialists. You could only get promoted if there's a quota of so many people that could get that position. And let's say you needed like, you know, 800 points, like let's say 800 points is the highest number, right? Well, I needed like 790 points to get promoted. And even with like a few college courses or a high PT score and like a few things, there was no way I was going to get to that position unless it dropped to a certain number, this kind of thing basically. And so to me, that was like a huge minus. Like I could tell that, you know, like maybe in a combat situation, of course it's going to be different. Like if someone's like, you know, super brave or like has great leadership skills, they might get promoted faster that way. But as it goes, as far as promotion goes, it seemed kind of like, at least to an extent, like a waiting game. You know, it's kind of ironic that the Army is like, you know, for a long time was like to fight against communism, but like the Army is like communism as far as it's set up. You know, I mean, obviously everyone's the same, right? And then the promotion system was like everyone's kind of the same as they go up to, and super inefficient, like hurry up and wait. Like they make you race to get all this stuff done, and then you're like sitting around most of the time not doing anything. You know, I don't even remember a girl walking in, one of my friend's girlfriend, who's a civilian, she walked into my office once and she's like, "You guys are lucky." We're like, "Why?" And she's like, "Because like if you have a private job like at a corporation, you're going to be actually working your ass off because they need to make money to survive. Like the Army's not like a corporation that's like trying to make money. Like, of course, when there's a war, they're super busy and there's a lot of stuff going on. But like, you know, it's just a big government enterprise that doesn't run efficiently. And it doesn't really make a lot of sense, like a lot of government things are. So you've got a lot of this PC stuff. You've got a lot of this, you know, overly like equality kind of things. And so I thought that that was really the biggest turnoff at the beginning when I realized that like I wasn't going to like really make it up in promotion very quickly. It was like it wasn't worth it to me. Yeah, and part of that political correct kind of stuff is like I was talking to a guy a couple years ago who just got out of the 82nd Airborne Division. And you know, when you fuck up, like you'll get an Article 15 or you'll get in trouble, you know, they'll smoke you. Smoking is basically like, you know, you have to do a bunch of push-ups, sit-ups, so you'll have like weekend duty, like having to buff the floors or paint, whatever bullshit. Now they're not even allowed to smoke you, I guess. Like they just give you like a verbal warning if you get in trouble. So yeah, it's definitely getting, I don't know if I'd say like feminized, but it's definitely not like a hardcore kind of thing anymore. Now, of course, like the Rangers and Special Forces, I don't think all the parts of the Army are going to be affected by that stuff as much, but overall the Army is, you know, just a big government agency. So a lot of kind of dumb things happening. You know, and of course the worst thing is that you could get killed and injured in a war, obviously. And, you know, when I joined, you know, in 97 is when I joined. I went in 98. And really, there hadn't been a big war since Vietnam. There was Desert Storm and some small stuff in Panama and Grenada and stuff like that. But there really wasn't a big war since the Vietnam War had ended in 75. The Cold War ended, I guess, what, 91? So, I mean, to me, there was nothing. And then my last year in the Army, September 11th happened. You know, and who would have ever thought? You know, I remember the next day after that happened, I had to take, you know, I drove in the base. It was like a 4-hour wait because they were checking everyone's car inside out, and all of the Humvees were up at the headquarters, because that was like headquarters of the 82nd. So there were 2 main buildings, the one with all like the generals and high officers, and then we were next door. And you know, we knew shit was going to go down. I mean, I was even looking out of the window like afraid a plane was going to hit the fucking building, because we were headquarters of a pretty prestigious unit. And that changed everything, you know, because obviously a lot of people were starting to go to Afghanistan, and I had looked at like the Russians' experience there in the 80s, and it wasn't good. And so I knew we were probably going to get stuck there for years, which was the case. And one really important thing you got to realize is that when you sign up for the Army, it doesn't matter if you do 2, 3, 4, 6 years, you're in the Individual Ready Reserve for 8 years regardless. So what that means is that you might do 2 years in active duty, but any time after that, like for 6 years, they could recall you to fight in a war. Now, personally, I wasn't worried about that because they hadn't did that since like World War II and the Korean War. Basically, when people got back from World War II, some of those people got pulled back a few years later to go to Korea and fight. That's the only time I had heard of that happening in the last, you know, like 70 years. But because of the Iraq war and the Afghanistan war, they started calling people back. And by this time I was already, you know, a civilian. I'm in university. I don't want to get called back to go to like Iraq, which to me, quite frankly, seemed kind of like a bullshit thing. Like Saddam had no relation. Like it seemed like maybe not even for oil, but like just to rebuild the country, just for like, you know, weapons manufacturers to make a bunch of money. Like it did not seem like that had to happen. Like I knew Afghanistan was, or something was going to happen, but the Iraq thing seemed like bullshit. You know, so I definitely didn't want to get called back, especially because of the promotion thing I just mentioned to you. Now, if I went back and it was like a regular promotion thing where I knew that the best people were in charge of me, or I was a sergeant or an E6, but like I could see that people were promoted who were just like there for a long time, who were definitely not intelligent at all. And I was like, you know, I could think of some of the sergeants at the time. I was like, they're going to get us killed in like 10 minutes, you know? And so it was definitely a concern. Not all of the NGOs that were in charge of me were bad. I had some really good ones, actually, and I had some really bad ones. So, you know, that was definitely an issue, that you can get called back. Of course, a lot of people got called back for several tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, you know, because like when people went to Vietnam, they only did 1 year. You only had to do 1 tour, and that was it. So for this, people went back there 3, 4 times. And even if you never got injured or killed, I mean, one good thing was that, of course, they did make a lot of money doing it, but like your wife's at home for 3 years with your kids, and you know, that's how divorces happen. They find someone else, or you know, it's not going to work out, so that really ruined a lot of marriages. I remember in my last year, the first group to go to Afghanistan were the SF guys. So I think we went to Afghanistan right away, like in October or something like that, or November. And by that winter or spring, a few SF groups came back. There was at least 3 murder-suicides, I remember. Obviously, their wife or something was happening, and, you know, they killed them and themselves. So these things, you know, you get deployed and your wife's sitting on a base or somewhere, and, you know, in those cases, those guys obviously weren't gone long, but who knows what they saw or what happened. But yeah, psychologically, that's another issue. You know, some people come back psychologically fucked, even if you're not physically injured. And so, all of these things are things you're going to have to consider. You know, sure, you could get a lot of great benefits. You could retire in 20 years with a good job and skills, or you could get stuck at Fort Bragg most of your life and end up in a place like Afghanistan or Iraq. Is that going to be worth it? I personally don't think so, but, you know, for each their own. So that's something you're going to have to decide. You know, it's just to add to that mental health issue. You know, I mean, yeah, for sure it was depressing. You know, you're with a bunch of dudes from all over America who, generally speaking, are coming from either like kind of smaller towns or inner city guys who probably came from some pretty tough backgrounds and had a lot of issues. You know, like I mentioned, my one buddy, that first guy, you know, his dad had died and he was fighting with his mom all the time. My second roommate, you know, his mother died of cancer, and then his dad like abandoned him and he was homeless. And so he even changed his last name to his mother's maiden name. But a lot of these guys come from pretty sad backgrounds. And so you're with a lot of depressed energy, to be honest. It's not that we didn't have a great time, and I did meet some great friends. The Army does have a lot of idiots, but there was also some really bright people and cool people as well. But yeah, you're really going to put yourself in a situation for a few years, like you might be in a crappy duty station with a shitty job, asshole, sergeant or first sergeant or captain, whatever. And you can be really unhappy, and that's not something that a lot of people are willing to go through, and I don't blame them. I was definitely not super happy when I was in the military, so I was obviously glad to get out, which most people are. But with all that being said, I don't regret it. I mean, I still think, it paid for my bachelor's and most of my master's degree, and since then I've traveled the world. You can look on this channel and my other things. I biked around the world. I hiked the AT. I commercial fished in Alaska. I lived in China for over 10 years. I had a touring company out there, and now I'm going to go off and explore some other areas like in South America or live abroad. So you can check out those other things on my channel. But these are all the things you're going to have to think about if you're going to stay in. So anyway, check out my channel for some other interesting comment. If this video was helpful, like it. If you want to see some content based more on like traveling and adventures, subscribe to the channel. And good luck with everything. I hope everything works out well for you if you're considering going in. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments below. And good luck on the adventure. If you've got, your head straight and you've got the discipline and you're willing to do the work, it can be super rewarding. If it's not for you, don't consider it probably, but good luck, and I wish you the best. Take care.